Hello and welcome back to the Talent Acquisition Matters podcast with me, Tom Dove, founder of Fraser Dove International, the life science talent consultancy. I hope you've been enjoying the season so far. I'm really pleased to introduce today's guest, Isabelle Hung, who is renowned TA superstar, nominated numerous times in the most influential in-house TA leaders by recruiter.co.uk. She spent her career immersed in the global talent acquisition space with an amazing career supporting a host of blue chip companies. Her expertise spans everything from TA strategy development, digitalization, employer branding, direct sourcing, and everything in between. You name it, she's done it, including a few epic sailing trips thrown in there too. Izzy has worked across a series of high growth, hyperscale industries like gaming, retail, devices, and consumer, working with some of the most demanding stakeholders in the industry. But what I think really stands out in Izzy's career and her expertise is in-house executive search. So a microclimate of its own in this TA world, and an area we're keen to understand more about today. So Izzy, hello, how are you?
Hello, thank you very much for having me. And that was a great introduction. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Yes, what I've started to find out is that then I ask people to introduce themselves and I've already done it. So there you go. If you want to just introduce yourself just briefly, okay. That would be great.
So, I'm Isabelle Hung, or commonly known as Izzy. Most people know me as Izzy. Yeah, I have, as Tom says, I've pretty much done everything within the industry, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And I do think it's, for me, I'm really lucky because I've seen all facets of talent acquisition and how important it is that all of those facets and external support and sourcing and everything all work as one solution as opposed to individual facets. And I think because I've sat on all sides of the fence, I do have perspective of that. Sometimes it's not necessarily the right perspective or people's perspective, but actually I think it's given me that 360, which I'm very lucky to have been in all of those different types of organizations.
Yeah, and I'm quite a big believer in a holistic talent ecosystem. So like talent acquisition, as you said, sometimes can even be segregated into lots of different areas that maybe don't even speak all the time. So it'd be really good to get your insight into that. But let's kick things off. Obviously, you recently spoke at the Inhouse Expo about straightforward in-house exec search. And I love this idea. And, I'll let the listeners into a secret. We actually worked together. We were a supplier of yours a few years ago. But I'd love to explain more about kind of your idea of what straightforward in-house exec hiring looks and feels like.
So, everyone always says to me, what's the difference between, mainstream recruitment versus exec hiring? And I think that it's more time costly for a recruiter. I do think that you need to have a level of experience in both business and talent acquisition or recruitment, shall we say, one or the other. But I don't, and I'm not ageist about it, but I do think you need a level of business acumen. So having worked in a number of different organizations in a leadership role, I think that really adds value to the client. The client being, either you as in having a client or me having an internal stakeholder. I refer to my stakeholders as my kind of clients, and it is a consulting approach. And the difference is it takes more time in sense of, leaders want to make sure that they understand the job before they go forward. So, we talk about exec hiring, really understanding what are the business challenges and how is that leadership role going to fit into that challenge and what is that individual going to get from it. And I think that's one of the bigger differences is it's at a business level now. People at VP and above level have obviously got some level of capability to get there. This is about you as a recruiter really understanding what the business is offering in this role to that individual. And there's a big difference there.
Yeah, and I think it's the stakeholder groups that you're working with at that kind of senior end can sometimes change plan, tactic, idea throughout the process, which can be a bit of a challenge. Yes. So I mean, how do you manage some of the kind of more demanding stakeholders out there, or clients, internal clients? Yeah,
it's definitely something that you can do straight away. and also I think if you've managed people, you learn patience and humility with it.
Yeah.
And if you sit back and think of that stakeholder, particularly at a C-suite or a kind of a senior level, they probably don't hire very often, not like your everyday managers, directors, VPs even, right? They don't do it very often. And whilst you think that they should be good at it, there is an element of coaching that goes with that. So I think it's about fundamentally listening to them. And if they are going to change track, what is the reason for that? And I think, coming on to kind of what makes great execution, I think in any recruitment is that first conversation, that first briefing. And it's not about the briefing with that stakeholder, it's about everybody else that has a view on that role. Because normally at exec hiring level, the role is so fundamental to the business that everyone has a view on that. So for example, we're currently in the process of hiring an SVP for global support. Yeah, they would fundamentally, where are you going to put that? Could you put it in the US? Put it in the UK? There are different decisions about senior roles than there are about other roles potentially. Yeah. The impact, what's it going to do? Is it transformational? If it's transformational, should I be speaking to the other departments, which I often do at exec hiring, speak to all the other departments that this role is going to impact on as they transform that individual function, or that particular program that they're coming in to do. So for me, the time that you spend, and I think all recruitment levels, spending time at this first stage is Plato's law, right? It's all about the front end process. Getting the candidates through is easier.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I think that there's an element of, I think that the best recruiters or executive search consultants are defined by the questions they ask, not the answers they give. So it's about fact finding. Yes. And I think that now there is a desire to create a story almost. So you create a technical story around the technical experience that's required for a certain position, but then actually it's the story of who the hiring stakeholders are, what their journey has been, where they've been in their career, and what this role is going to be doing next, all of these kind of things, because you have to have a certain level of empathy. Like when you're speaking to an exec, they want to understand that detail. It's not just, how much money is it going to pay? That's now kind of not exactly. So it's all around the story building. And I think you're right. Spending that time at the beginning is absolutely vital. Or maybe even doing it over a couple of different sessions to really curate the story and then go back and say, this is what we're going to say about this.
It's definitely a couple of sessions for me. And if it was a SVP like this role, I've literally met everybody who is a colleague to that person and a colleague in other departments and the people that might report in, if you are able to do that, because getting that 360 is really important. And I have got, and I think I gave it when I gave it the talk, I have an exec hiring checklist for myself, because it's not just about, it's about the business unit, and it's about the culture of that business unit and everybody in it, but it's also about all the functions that interact with that. And when you think, for example, if you think of support, you've got customer success, you've got marketing, you've got sales, you've got professional services. All of those functions interlock with that to make the customer have a great experience.
Yep.
So it's important to share. For me in this role, I spoke to CEO and said, what fundamentally does this mean to you? So it is the story of that role, the stakeholders, the peers, the person profile, the responsibilities, how the responsibility is going to impact on the rest of the business. It's what first year success looks like. And I think there's all of that data information that, I've learned from working with search firms, the candidate briefing document's really important, being able to share who's in the team, LinkedIn profiles. So actually, when you have that initial headhunt call, I often have that meet and greet of half an hour. Look, I'm going to tell you something about it, and then I'm going to send you the candidate briefing document. Go away, do your own due diligence, come back and tell me whether you're really genuinely interested, because that's the buy-in as well. You've got to have that buy-in. But, and most execs that I talk to don't really know what the target universe is like, No. So, being an exec person, you also have to have done your own research into the company's marketplace. and who are those? And actually, at most senior levels, we're not taking from necessarily from our competitors. We could be taking from, particularly if it's technology, you can take from many places and bring those skill sets in. So that first piece for me is absolutely critical. Absolutely critical.
Yeah, and then you're kind of locking down those stakeholders to something that we've all said. This is the information that we're going to share with the candidates to start their kind of candidate experience with our organization. Because, I think it's quite interesting where the recruitment market has changed significantly over the years, even more so in the last couple of years, where it's quite difficult at times to cut through the noise if your story isn't good enough for a candidate anymore, because they are being approached so often by so many different companies or industries, as you were saying, with the tech space. So actually, it's being able to go with a well-curated story that is like, cool, yeah, okay, that's got my interest. Followed that up with a really smart-looking candidate pack or whatever it might be, clickable links to see everybody. Then the next thing, I suppose, is kind of that candidate content, I suppose. You've worked in the employer branding side of the business. How important do you think that is now in being able to cut through the noise?
I think this is a really interesting debate at exec level, because everybody is going to make up their own minds very differently to your second or third jobber. Yeah. You'd hope at this level that the execs you're talking to have heard of you. They go and do, and most execs that I speak to, or most of the people that I engage with, they literally go away and do their own due diligence. And I think as an exec recruiter, you have to have enough confidence in yourself that you've given them enough information, because they have to do something for themselves. And that's the buy-in bit for me. It is about, the experience that you give candidates or people at this level is slightly different. It's about, for me, I'm more about, by the time I've got their interest and then I go into a deep dive, I always lock down at that first stage this selection process. This is who you're going to meet, and at each stage I'm going to give you a criteria of what they're going to ask you about, because it's all about two people getting the best from each other. And often I think that, if people just go through CVs and stuff, particularly at exec level, that doesn't really help. I think you need to help your hiring managers at this level, your execs at this level, to give them, you need to talk to John about X, Y, and Z, because these are the things that he did that are relevant to your transformation or to your function. And then it gives the stakeholder comfort that they don't have to find it. They can just go straight in. Izzy's told me that these are great things. I really wanted to talk to you about this. And I think that's really important as well, is there is a coaching element or an influence element that you have on your senior stakeholders. And I do think that comes with time, feeling comfortable in your own skin, that you are making the right decision. Because at exec hiring level, you're making the decision on who that exec sees.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that you have to feel quite comfortable in your own trade, that a good candidate when you see them, even though you're not an expert in. When you and I worked together, I think I was hiring some medical scientists, and I've never done that space before. But I know that my strength is in finding out whether people can do that through their own behavior. So I think you have to feel very, very comfortable that you are putting those and if you've got any doubt, and I've had this recently, I put someone forward which I kind of had a gut instinct I didn't feel it was right, but on paper they looked right because it wasn't my space, and I just knew that they were going to bomb, but I had to put them forward just to make sure that was, I couldn't write it on paper. There was just something not right. But
yeah, and I think
it backfired on me, so you learn from that every day.
And gut feel is a big thing. That's what we're here to do, as the kind of exec search specialists, is eliminate some of that gut feel. But then when your hiring stakeholders are in it, they're the ones, again, that need the coaching, because they'll go, do you know what? I quite like this person. And then it'll transpire later on in the process.
And they always like the first person you put in, because they haven't done this for so long. So I try not to put my best person first.
Yeah. I
kind of try to put something in between, because they go, oh my God, it's amazing. And then the next person, like, oh my God, how do I they can't evaluate one to the other. So I do think it's really important, more than ever at exec level, to actually be able to sit with your stakeholder and say, this is the conversation I had, these are the people I spoke to, this is what and I think there's a two-way street at that very early stage, particularly when your stakeholder's hiring somebody that they've never hired before, but at a level they've never hired at before. I often say, look, I want you to interview these people, but I also want you to interview a level below. And if you can, have a half an hour conversation with someone too senior, just to kind of, be able to level off for people. Sometimes people find leveling really difficult if they haven't done it for a while.
Yeah. And so do you spend, once you've got the kind of briefing all sorted, you've curated your story, it seems as though you're spending a lot of time communicating with the stakeholders to ensure the process moves smoothly. Are you doing that?
Yeah, at the early stage, definitely. And as we go through, we've got 5 stages here. I've written a 5-stage process. It's if I don't speak to them in the week, it is important to do an update. I think in any recruitment job, right? Every Friday, update. This is where you're at. And if I can get, I've got interviews happening this week in London. So, I just happen to be in London. So I'm going to sit for half an hour afterwards and say, what did you think? What was the immediate reaction to that? Yeah. I mean, Forgerock's really good. My stakeholders are very good. They all feed back very quickly. But I know that that's not always the case. So, if it's not the case in your organisation, stick in 15 minutes at the end of those interviews and get them while it's still hot.
Yeah, good. Because I was going to say, how do you keep extremely busy, time poor execs, consistent with things like that? But are you saying small windows, try and keep it sharp? After a process. Make friends with the PAs. The PAs you've got to be your best friends across the organisation. Help them understand. So I always CC a PA into all of the updates because they've got that information as well. Yeah. So obviously you talked about like the straightforward nature of in-house exec hiring. How many companies do you think are getting it right out there at the moment?
I don't know. I really genuinely don't know. I think it's not one. It's a similar process for everybody, but it's adaptable for every organisation. Every organisation will have slightly different inuits. They don't want to do that, or it's got to go in a system, right? I think it depends on the relationship with your HR department, your chief people officer. How do they want to do it? Sometimes they leave you to it 100%. Other people want to be totally involved. I do think it depends on the organisation you're in, what works best for that organisation. If I think back, to kind of Sage days, we were hiring a lot of execs because we were in massive transformation of going from on-prem to cloud. Yeah. So I think that it depends. Are you in massive, are you hiring a lot or are you hiring a few? Philip Morris, we were hiring a lot. Yeah. So, guiding and understanding where the ownership of exec hiring is really important to enable you to move quickly through processes and changes and adaptations and stuff. So I do think that straightforward exec hiring needs to be in your organization. But in the end, it is a recruitment process on steroids. That's all it is. You just need to know more, have deeper conversations and have greater depth and understanding about the organization and across functions. Yeah. I see it as a luxury. I love it because I see the whole organization.
Yes. And the relationships that you build are with, some of the most important stakeholders within the strategic landscape of a business. I think that what we're seeing at the moment is those companies that are really getting it right when they've got a lot of exec hiring to do, they do have in-house exec hiring. But what they are also quite, open to is partnering with suppliers that maybe are better at a certain complexity within a, technical experience or something. How do you, how do you feel is best, or what is the best way to kind of work with suppliers in this space at that level?
So I would say in some ways it's no difference. Well, maybe it is on the volume side of things, but for me, you treat, we work together, right? You treat your supplier as your partner and an extension of your team. Yeah, if you have to sign NDAs, get NDAs signed. But in essence, you shouldn't treat your supplier any differently to how you treat the rest of your recruitment function, or exec hiring function, to me anyway, and create some, don't make assumptions or grey areas, create that opportunity, say, look, I will deal with a stakeholder, or I'd really like you to come in. I'd like you, if we're going to do feedback calls, I want you on the feedback calls kind of thing. But set those parameters from the start so you don't get suppliers contacting your stakeholder directly because you don't want them to, make it so that you are in unison together. So all the information that you get as an in-house person, the agency or search firm gets as well. Yeah. I think that's really important. And, especially when I worked at Philip Morris with you guys and Hydrix, for example, and some of the other guys we were working with, some of the areas I really, like the medical side, I don't have experience in. I can't talk my stakeholders through what that marketplace looks like. So I think there's real value to bringing in your search partners at various, particularly at the front end, but also at various stages of closing candidates and stuff, to be able to share what else is happening in that space.
Yes.
Because if you are in a very large company with an exec hiring function, you can't be across the whole of that industry or all of those functions, and working with, I find, a partner, they can come in and add value, like, well, we spoke to 10 people in the last 2 months about that's very specific. These are some of the things they want. You can add more context to the external environment particularly if you're hiring very niche people. I think that's really important to bring value around that.
Yeah. And, we talk about time, and you mentioned it earlier that time and business acumen are, key to the exec hiring space here. We calculated within our business that for the exec hires, you're looking at about 100 hours of assessment just within that kind of long listing to shortlist standpoint. Yeah. That's a long time. And if you're exec hiring function that's got 10 of these roles, you've got, 1,000 hours to find somewhere. So you've got to trust in the partner that you're working with. And, it's interesting that you spoke about added value then in the negotiation and the offer stage. What other value do you think suppliers can give to both the TA and the stakeholders throughout the search process?
So some I have a preference. I think there's if you're giving a supplier the search, then the relationship with that candidate can either sit with the supplier or can sit with the in-house function. Now, I've done it both ways, and I think you need to set that expectation from the start, because when you get to offer, the person with the greatest relationship with that candidate should make that offer, right? So I've been in organisations where I've worked with a search firm, and I've said, look, I'm going to interview the candidate, and then I'm going to manage that candidate all the way through to fruition. Yeah. In other organisations, because of time, because there's so many roles, I said, no, you've got to manage the candidate. I'm going to manage the operational piece here in terms of getting that person into the diary sort of thing. So I think you need to manage that really importantly. And I think particularly when you know the role is outside of your kind of knowledge area, I do think, like medical, right? For me, I would rather that candidate sits with the agency, because I can't add any context to it at all. Yeah. Yeah. You can add context. So I do think, like you say, everything at exec is all individual to that role and that business.
Yeah. I also think that the right supplier can create a safe space for communication. Everybody now knows that kind of pressurized recruitment tactics of old are yesterday's news. And now it's more about candidate experience, being able to listen with empathy, but also be on your side. So it's having the right conversation with, exec hiring, and then being able to put that in the right context to the candidate and report back. So it's all one team, as you said earlier, that's trying to get the right result and overcome the challenge that the business is having, which is not having the person in place. So what about things like the kind of data or mapping or metrics that come with some of the complex searches? Does that still add value?
I do think it depends on the size and scale of the organisation.
Yep.
When we were at Sage, we were hiring a lot of VPs of product marketing and product management, 10, 20 across the organisation. So it was a lot across kind of 12 months. I think in that scenario, and particularly where you've got a brand that may be unknown. I mean, Philip Morris was going from, cigarette company to digital consumer company. I think there's some value that can be had around the insights around marketing, not just about talent. The perception of the brand. What do you think? So, what do you think before versus at the end, start and end of the process? When I worked at one technology company, they were going through a transition of change of brand, and the brand perception originally was quite old and fuddy-duddy, right?
Yeah.
They hadn't changed it for so long. But over a period of, I think it was probably over a period of 12 months, maybe a bit longer than that. At the start of the process, as I started to reach out to headhunt people, I'd ask, what do you think of the brand? Me reaching out, well, it's like this. And then, it's old and it hasn't really changed. And I said, well, look, let me tell you kind of what we're doing. This is kind of some of the scenarios. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that was happening. So I think you can add huge amounts of value to marketing and teams like that to say, this is what I'm hearing on the street. This is what people are saying about you. And then I remember going back to marketing saying, oh my God, I just spoke to someone who said they'd just been to one of your conferences and they thought it was amazing, the transition. So I think being cognizant of going and sitting with marketing and say, what do you want me to say? Particularly if it's a larger organization. I mean, Forgerock, we haven't had to do that so much, but we are very well known in the US, but not so well known in Europe. But that is equally being shared on all hands calls with marketing. So it's joined up. And then further back, working with an investment bank while I was at AMS, and and people had this assumption that no one wanted to work there. Like literally, and it was like, oh, no one wants to work there. Anyway, so we did this. We asked people during the recruitment process, and then I went back to marketing. They said, oh, we've just asked our customers the same thing. We kind of joined, and it was, well, it's just because you don't tell us what it's like. There's no understanding of what it's like to work there. And marketing were like, that's the same response we got. So it was an assumption that wasn't really true. So I think there's some real opportunity around how can you use recruitment, exec recruitment, to shift some of that.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think it's
because how many people you touch in that journey, the candidate document, all of that is an opportunity.
Absolutely. And I think that, if you talk about your mission and your values of a business, right, they also need to be in the candidate experience and the content that the candidates see too, not just a job specification. They need to, really kind of feel the business, I would say. And some companies are kind of streets ahead in that at the moment. And they're the ones that are almost becoming magnets for candidates. So you might have some senior execs in the business that have got good personal brands that are on social channels like LinkedIn, or you might have some fantastic videos where you can see people that look like you and you feel closer to that organization from a D&I standpoint. Or you've got those other companies that are like, we're who we are. People should come and work for us. People should want to work for us. And those days, unfortunately, aren't, the same anymore. And I think that those companies that are working cohesively, as you said, with marketing, with communications, with the in-house recruitment teams to get the message out there are the ones that will be magnets for more talent. So you mentioned that, working with suppliers in this space, you have to forge a real kind of strong partnership. The data and the metrics side isn't as important as the kind of perception of the brand. But what we're seeing at the moment is some of our hiring stakeholders within the business are quite keen to know kind of attrition rates of their competitors or salary information or, all of this kind of stuff that is trying to help them make a more informed hiring decision.
Yes.
And is there any, you're obviously working with these stakeholders more often than not, is there any real reason for it? Or is it just to kind of make sure that they're not making a massive boo-boo? What's your thoughts on a lot of the data that sits behind the decision-making?
The decision-making of hiring an individual or... Yes. Yeah.
The demand is there at the moment. We're seeing like more and more requirements just for what is backing up the decision-making from the exec search.
That's really interesting. I think there is an argument to say references are becoming less and less viable, right? I think soft referencing at exec level is good. Being able to, and most people in a smaller organization, or it doesn't really matter actually, there are people that know that individual through one connection or another, right? But is that really something that can be used as a value add? I'm not sure, because no one wants to speak badly about anybody, right? So you're never going to get the downsides of that. The attrition one's a really interesting one. I've never heard that before in terms of, is that company just losing people and therefore, you're not getting that. But I think we've had a recent scenario where we were hiring our VP of finance, and my God, and this is in San Francisco, and the marketplace is hot. Like, people are being bought out left, right, and centre for stupid money. Yeah. And you could get the same person, somewhere else in America for a different price. But I think that what was really interesting to me is all the people that were actually really good they move every 2 to 3 years, sometimes less than that, because the marketplace is so hot. So my stakeholders were saying to me, does that mean that they're rubbish because they keep moving? And I said, no. I said, they're moving because, they're getting 5 calls a day and being offered silly money. So they take the company IPO, they get the money, and they kind of leave again. I said, so you've got to decipher whether they're genuinely leaving for a reason that is other than money or not. And that's very difficult to do. So I think this decision making is very much regionalized.
Yes.
Definitely, without a doubt, in San Fran, right? But I think it's also regionalized to core roles in the business. So VP Marketing Europe. For us, we've now got a VP Marketing Europe. She came on board, but both her and the previous candidate we had recently been put on retention bonuses to keep them. I've never seen that in marketing in Europe before, and some of them were government organizations. It's a very difficult one, and if you're not ready to make that decision, or your stakeholders aren't ready to make that decision, then it's not the right candidate.
Yeah, and the current situation of things like buyback is also a new obstacle or a new
I haven't seen that for years.
Discussion point with hiring stakeholders, because they then go through an entire process, and it might take 8, 10, 12 weeks to get through the process with the candidate who is totally committed to making the move, and then a silly offer comes in where it's like double your basic, or here's an LTIP that you can't turn down, and then you're kind of back to the drawing board. So the financial side of things, and especially in markets like America, are changing massively. Crazy. So it's about, making yourself stand out in the process. And I think a real key way to do that is pace and candidate experience.
Yeah, with that VP of finance, the lovely chap that we've just landed, he had a very big offer from someone else, mainly in the equity, and he came to us because he wants to develop his own career. He wants a coach. He wants to develop his career. He came to us because of the experience that he had. That's what made his final decision, and all the money in the world. Hopefully he's made the right one to come to us, because he turned down some quite high numbers, but he made the decision based on the experience and the opportunity that we shared with him. So that's quite powerful.
Yeah. And do you think that is down to the candidate experience that he had throughout that process?
Yeah, 100%.
And how do you think, how do you think you can perfect the candidate experience piece? What's the kind of secret sauce for you?
In this instance, my stakeholder was happy to do calls at any time, because he wanted to prove that, my CFO basically wanted to prove that he was going to be that person. He wanted to coach someone. He wants to give someone the opportunity to step up. And he did it at weekends, and he replied to text messages. I always say to candidates that once you get through a certain stage, you guys need to be able to share. At that final stage, when you've only got 1 or 2 people, then I do think it's important that relationship is built directly with the hiring manager.
Absolutely.
Getting hiring managers to do that is quite rare, but I mean, here everyone's very prepared to do that. So I think that's really, really important, because it shows the candidate that it's not recruitment driving this; it is the business.
Yeah, and I think no matter how many times I've asked this question, there are lots of different answers to the secret sauce of candidate experience, but for me, it always comes back to communication. So it could be anything from feedback to the consistency to the being available.
Even if you haven't got anything to say, just say that.
Yes.
Don't leave it. Just say, look, I haven't got any feedback. I'm really sorry. I know it's been 2 weeks. I can't do anything about it. I'm chasing. There's nothing more I can do. You've got to keep that momentum going somehow.
Yeah. And I think the more that the hiring stakeholders are on board with that communication play, the better. Because as you say, once they step into that void, it brings the candidate so much closer. Yeah. And if they're going to fundamentally help the business achieve their mission or their vision, then you have to just put the work in. What's 10, 15 minutes a week of additional conversations with someone that's going to solve your biggest, hiring headache. So yeah, I think it's super important. Okay, cool. So I'm interested to understand a little bit more about kind of your thoughts on the future of the in-house exec search space. Because
I don't know. Everybody asks this. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's loads of jobs out there, but no one's really being hired. Everybody, you look at the marketplace, the stock market is down, but then there's masses of jobs everywhere and no one can find anybody. So I really don't know. I do, personally, I think the world is in a bit of flux. It doesn't really know how to operate. No one's really buying anything at the moment. Retail is down. Online people aren't going down. I think people are looking for an experience again. So I think for me, I do think it's going to be another kind of couple of months of this numbness, of this weird environment that we are in. And as people, particularly in the UK, I think it's sunshine orientated. But I do think that as the world starts to come back to life, people are wanting to have an experience around stuff. So exec hiring is high touch, right? And even today, I was on calls with Australia this morning to do some VP roles out there. It's changing. People are more accepting of technology. So I probably 2 years ago, I wouldn't have sent a WhatsApp message to someone and say, I'm going to call you in a minute, but I'm going to WhatsApp call you instead. Yeah. You wouldn't have been able to do that before. So I do think technology's played a really interesting part in terms of getting people quicker. That's the agility piece. I don't think there's going to be in exec hiring. I don't think it will change massively. I think the evolution, it's getting more and more prevalent to have exec hiring irrelevant to the size of the organization.
Yeah.
And so I think that will shift. And technology, yes, it makes things faster. ATSs, CRMs, you can have all of those things to your fingertips. But at the end of the day, it's about the personal journey that you give someone.
Yeah, and I think some of the higher volume, lower complexity searches are supported well by different technologies, different trends that are happening. But I think, as you said, it's high touch, it's exec level, communication is key. I think traditional headhunting skills will only become more prevalent, but just be supported by some things that might speed up that process.
Correct. It needs to speed up the process. I think one of the things that search firms definitely need to get better at is, I come to a specialist search firm because I know that you have people that will be there. And, if I said, I want you to hire me a doctor in whatever kind of thing, or a medical devices person, I don't have that list compared to going and getting a VP of marketing for Europe kind of thing. Yeah. It shouldn't take 4 to 6 weeks. I think that it actually go at the list in the 2 weeks and let's start talking. I think that front end piece of sourcing needs to get faster, because actually when you're in-house, I had my VP of Australia and New Zealand, for example, that role came to me 2 weeks ago and we're interviewing next week.
Yeah, fantastic.
It's got to, because I only look after 2 or 3 roles at any one time because of the time, as you say, 100 hours. I don't think I spend 100 hours, but I think it takes a lot more time. But I do think it needs to be faster at the front end because businesses are just moving quickly.
Yeah. And I think those kind of days of, it's going to take us 3 months. We're going to fly and meet every candidate, and then you get a shortlist at the end of the 90 days, whatever it is. Now the demands are that the hire is completed within 60. So that paradox needs to kind of shift. I do definitely understand, though, that it's quality, it's business impact that the hire has to make. But you're right, the speed is definitely coming down. And what we're seeing is, companies like my one or other kind of small, medium-sized search firms out there are moving with that pace because they're not working on a million different mandates at any one time. They work on less with more of a team around it, and they can execute those searches faster.
Yeah.
So it's good, though. I like Yeah, I've had lots of answers so far where it's very future-proof, VR headsets, all of this meta recruitment type stuff.
Oh.
But traditional headhunting will never die. I think it's probably that communication will be the key thing. Okay, cool. So you spoke earlier about like a holistic talent acquisition partnership across both suppliers and internally. What do you think makes for the, perfect talent ecosystem with TA? How does it all connect, or what's your experience where it's all connected fantastically and everybody's been singing off the same hymn sheet? How have you seen that work?
I haven't been anywhere that's probably like that, but I think you've got to have a really good relationship with all of HR. My relationship with comp, my relationship with, the HR director, actually, particularly for exec hiring, talent succession, you have to be part of the succession planning conversation. And I've been in one organization, technology organization, and actually I did it in a retail organization, sitting down on a quarterly basis and looking at who are the top 10 managers in this function, for example? Who are the top 10%? Where are we going? Are they happy? Do we need to start prompting them? What if they died tomorrow? Having those rich conversations with HR, I think is absolutely fundamental to driving the succession planning for exec hiring. That whole, I think that Philip Morris did it well. We had good organizational design. So if you are going massive transformation, it's probably the same as what you look at when you look at the customer, any customer. You look at customer success, you look at customer support, you look at professional services if you're in tech, for example, and then you look at sales. All of those things can't work without each other. Yes. And it's exactly the same within talent acquisition or HR or whatever you want to call it, talent management, HR, compensation, payroll and benefits, all of those things have to work together and have complete transparency where possible.
Yes.
And I do think, sorry.
I was going to say, it will be speaking the same language through the same systems.
Yes, and not hiding anything.
No.
You see, it's so common. You see HR and TA not engaged together because the HR department thinks TA's, a failed HR person. I see that a lot. Whereas actually they're two different skill sets.
Yes.
At the same level.
Yeah, and when you look at it, HR should see talent acquisition as a big time-saving part of their role, because for HR, recruitment is normally a very small element of a much broader role. So if they can build the right relationships with TA or the right relationships with suppliers, then it's a lot of time back and they know the quality of candidates coming through. Then it's the job of HR to retain the talent, because it's the onboarding and finding people is one part of the challenge, but there's no point in doing it if you can't keep them.
Yeah, and I think if your exec hiring comes in waves, because you don't want to hire people at the end of the year because it's super expensive to buy people out and stuff. Yep. So building stuff like, for me, I'm a qualified coach, so there's an opportunity to kind of, go and, instead of teaching people interview skills, teach people the power of questioning. So we're looking at a program to do that. Actually, you can use that in one-to-ones, you can use that in performance reviews, you can use that with the customer, rather than focusing in on interview questions, focus on questioning generally and the ability to debate backwards and forwards. I think if you've got a big exec hiring function, think about where they can add value in other areas when exec is low, and it tends to be at the back end of the year because you've done your kind of big hires, hopefully in the front end of your budget. So I think there's opportunity to utilize some of that skill set in different ways, particularly because, most of the people who do exec hiring are fairly experienced recruiters, and therefore are very good at having one-to-ones and being able to open and close questions with people, and maybe sit them side by side with managers in one-to-ones and use them, think about their skill set differently.
Yeah. Coaching, consulting, communication. I mean, these are not things that are brand new technologies or, things that are going to change the recruitment world. These are fundamentals that have been in place for a long time that clearly work. And I think that, this conversation today has really highlighted for me that traditional headhunting, as I said earlier, is here to stay. I think that,
100%.
We need to ensure that candidate experience has the right communication, that you're consulting and coaching your internal stakeholders, the candidates and the suppliers. So yeah, fantastic. Do you think, and I kind of asked this question earlier, but do you think that anything is going to change? I know we've seen huge digital transformation from a recruiting standpoint in the last 2 years. Do you think that there's going to be anything that comes over the next kind of 3 or 4 years that might also change the hiring landscape?
Do you know what? I haven't actually spent enough time looking at it. I was reaching out. I'm seeing some people in London this week to get up to speed on kind of tech and what's happening in that environment. I think the economic environment will have a huge impact over the next couple of years in terms of how we live and work is going to have an impact, particularly around, hybrid working, remote working, in the office. I think companies haven't made those decisions, or some companies haven't made those decisions yet. And I hear it every time I have a conversation with someone. Can I work at home? Can I work at home? Yeah. So I think the way we work generically as a human race will have a massive impact for sure.
Yeah, I've just seen Salesforce have created a working ranch, like a wellness hub for its staff, where I think you can get like 10,000 people there at any one time. But when you look at it online, you wouldn't get any work done. There's yoga mats here. There's all this kind of stuff that make it look like absolute heaven. But I think that as you said, that hybrid working, the desire to have more flexibility is going to stay. I think if you just look at the trains in the UK, for example, or airports all over the world, they're just so much lower from a percentage standpoint of where they were a few years ago.
Work from anywhere, outcome led. So actually, if you can get the right outcomes with 4 hours of work versus 16 hours of work, that's fine.
Go for it.
Maybe not getting the right outcomes, but I do think that our work's going to have to evolve into much more of that, because people have discovered they want their lives back. Yes.
And it's like, getting life balance, not a work-life balance. Yeah. Work is part of life, and you just need to ensure that you're getting everything right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, cool. Thank you very much for today, Izzy. I really, really appreciate it.
I enjoyed that.
Thank you. Look, for any of our listeners that want to get in touch and understand more about what you do, we can share some links on LinkedIn. But yeah, thank you very much for spending the time with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Yes. Bye-bye.